Hi guys, and welcome to the review. Just very quickly before we jump into it, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Patrick and Lance from Active Atom. This is not a sponsored thing. These are just a couple of guys out in the desert in California who work on restoring and working with old lathes, milling machines and what have you for precision instruments, especially to do with watchmaking. They are a couple of watchmakers as well. Really nice guys. If you're interested in machining and everything that's involved in that, go and check out their channel, take a look, and they're well worth a watch. Some of the stuff they've got on there is just beautiful, some of the old machinery. So they sent me this awesome sticker set, so thank you guys, much appreciated. As you can see, we've got one stuck on my mat there, along with my E-models and my Spidey Q8 sticker there. And I will be sticking these somewhere as well, so thank you for that. This is just a little clip before I do the rebuild on this Poljot alarm to show you the shock spring, if I can get it. It's slightly magnetised tweezers which I need to sort out. You can see the shock spring here, and I'm just showing this at the moment because this actually appears to be a hinged shock spring. You can see there, I'm just showing you the balance pivot jewel and the shock spring on this Poljot. And I'm showing you this because, as you saw on the previous little bit of footage with it removed, this looks like your typical Inca block lyre type spring, which is hinged, where you unhook the two tabs and then it hinges upwards. However, these aren't hinged. It's a tab that slides in. You have to slide that in first. It's not hinged, it's not bent. If you do try to hinge it upwards and it doesn't come out of the slot, you will break it, so do be aware of that. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that in case you were working on one of these and you were trying to hinge it upwards. Starting the rebuild, we fit the completed barrel assembly to the main plate. There I'm just removing a stray fibre that had gotten onto the arbor, and then oiling the central hole for the centre wheel. This is refitted, followed by oiling the top of the centre wheel and fitting the bridge. The bridges on these Poljot movements are quite unusual in that they're stepped up rather than a flat plate with a recess for the wheel, and the same is true of the train wheel bridge, as you'll see a little later. And these are a little bit fiddly, they don't seat quite as well as a typical bridge and need holding in place quite securely as you fasten them on to avoid misalignment. Here I'm fitting the barrel bridge. This is more of a traditional bridge, as you would expect to see, and the fitting is very straightforward and it's held in place by 3 screws. I'm just checking the rotation and making sure everything's moving freely before I go ahead and fit the click spring The click was left on the plate for cleaning and then removed and greased and then refitted. The click spring here you can see is being held in place by a piece of pegwood while I locate the tang. There are, I believe, 5 of these shepherd's crook type springs on this movement, and they can be a little fiddly. So, not shown there was oiling the barrel arbor in the plate, which I did prior to fitting the ratchet wheel just here. And here we grease the post for the crown wheel on which the collar sits, and then the collar itself before the wheel is fitted. Remembering, of course, that the screw for this is a left-hand thread, as denoted by the 3 lines on the screw head. This is something that's not always present on all movements, but typically with Russian movements and Swiss movements, you will find that left-hand thread screws will typically have 3 lines denoting that they are left-hand threads, but many newer movements don't have this. So, but crown wheels do tend to be left-hand thread. Next, we fit the 3rd and 4th wheels and the escape wheels. Lubricating the seconds post before fitting that through the centre wheel. And here we're fitting the train bridge. As mentioned previously, as with the centre wheel bridge, this is a raised type that has 3 posts that sit down on the plate, giving the MotionWorks side of this watch an unusual appearance. And it's important to make sure that this is seated correctly on all of the pivots, as it can be displaced easily. There you saw the rather unusual screws that hold this train bridge in place. It's held by 3 screws with very long screw heads, so it's absolutely impossible to mix those up with any of the other screws on this movement. Once that's secured down and the train is moving freely, the pallet fork and pallet cock are fitted. Making sure that the pivots are located securely in the pivot holes. Once this is done, I add a wind to the barrel and a very tiny amount of lubrication to the escape jewel of the pallet fork. It's very, very difficult to show that on camera. And here I fit the balance shim followed by the balance, and it's always nice to see the balance begin to beat away once that drops into place. And you can see there it's got quite a good amplitude, and this is as mentioned before in my videos, I always like to add just one wind when I refit the balance, and if you get a good if the balance fires up and you get a good beat to begin with, then you know that everything's quite clean and moving freely. Here I'm assembling the smaller mainspring barrel for the alarm works, which has a separate ratchet wheel on the lower. This engages the mechanism that drives the hammer, and the ratchet wheel on the top winds it via the second stem. We then have a toothed wheel and the hammer itself, which locate in sequence, followed by the alarm works bridge. This can be a little fiddly to align those latter two items under the bridge, and a little bit of jiggling of the hammer might be required to get that all to sit flush and behave nicely. And this is held in place by two screws. This completes the assembly of the top side of the mechanism, with the exception of the ratchet wheel, which operates in the same way as the mainspring barrel does, with a shepherd's crook spring for the click spring and then the ratchet wheel. And before moving on to the dial side, I lubricate all of the cup jewels, and including the barrel arbors prior to the fitting of the ratchet wheels on this this side before moving on to the dial side of the watch. Now onto the dial side of the watch, and this side is a very, very busy place, as you will see, and there is an awful lot to assemble on here, and it's unusual to see this on a mechanism that doesn't have any complications, any date or calendar works, for example. This has a fairly straightforward dial in terms of the hands, but the alarm complication adds a second set of keyless works, and then of course the various levers and actuators that operate the alarm itself. So there you saw I was fitting the setting lever and the release pin. Here I'm showing the intermediate wheels. There are actually 3 of these, and they are all a very, very slightly different size. And as you can see there, it's essential that you get these sized correctly as for which ones go on which posts. There will be a very precise fit, so if you've got any wiggle at all on any of them, you're on the wrong post. So it's essential that you check all three of those and ascertain which belong to which post. When fitting, the process is just like any intermediate wheel or anything of the sort, where you grease the post, fit them, and then fit the appropriate cover plate or screw. This part here, I'm not sure of the name, unfortunately, of its official name, as it were, but this is a pivoting plate which has two toothed wheels which mesh with the alarm setting wheels and with the winding setup also, according to the position of the crown, whether that's pulled out or pushed in. And the upper one on your screen there that I'm just lubricating the pivot of actually slides in addition to the plate moving, and you can see there I've just greased the return spring and I'm locating that onto that sliding pivot. The whole assembly is then held in place by a plate, which you'll see in just a moment, and that is screwed down through the pivot hole. Once this is screwed into place, a small amount of grease is applied to where it contacts the pin on the setting lever, and that is locked into place. This is the keyless works for the alarm side, and as you'll see when we move on to the keyless works for the hand setting, it's more of a traditional setup, but worth mentioning for both of them is the setting lever spring, the release spring, which is very fiddly. I'll point that out when we come on to the next one. There I'm fitting the stop lever for the alarm hammer. This actuates when you pull out the crown and stops the hammer from vibrating, and works very much like a hack would for a hacking movement that stops the balance from moving when you pull out the crown for setting the hands. And it contains a couple of shepherd's crook springs to act as return springs, and the whole assembly is held in place by this cover plate. And there I'm just checking the motion of the setting lever. Now move on to the hand setting side, and the release pivot is greased and fitted, followed by the setting lever after greasing the top of the pivot, and you'll notice here the setting lever spring, the release spring, is what's being fitted just here. These are incredibly fiddly to keep in place, and it helps if you hold them with a finger while you fit and fasten the screw. And what I was trying to do here was fit the assembly in such a manner that you were able to see what was going on, because obviously holding it with a finger would obscure that completely. There we move on to the winding pinion and clutch wheel before fitting the yoke and the rest of the keyless works. The yoke is a little tricky to fit because the tip of that fits into a slot, which is a little difficult to see here. So you have to feed the tip into the slot before fitting the yoke onto its post, and then a return spring, which is another shepherd's crook spring, as you can see there, is fitted. And the method, as previously, is it's held in place by a piece of pegwood or a finger. I'm trying to use pegwood here, where I do normally prefer to use a finger to hold these things in place while I manipulate the springs into place, but it's a little easier to see what's going on the camera if it's held by pegwood. And the cover plate fits on like so and screws through the pivot of the intermediate wheel, as you can see. It's held in place by 2 screws, and like the one for the alarm keyless works, the spring contact for the pin on the setting lever is greased lightly, and it's manipulated into place once the screws are fastened in. So there's the cannon pinion. And the minute wheel after lubricating the appropriate posts. And before fitting the hour wheel, I'm fitting this spring here, which is the spring that stops the hammer from moving until the hour wheel and the alarm wheel mesh together fully, at which point it's released and this allows the arm to actuate. And there on top of the dimple, which is where it contacts the hour wheel, I'm greasing that, lubricating the cannon pinion, and then the hour wheel fits on top. And you can see there's the spring, the movement in that bit of spring. These 3 pins I'm adding a little bit of grease to, because these rotate around underneath the alarm wheel and slide around underneath that, and then when they're fully aligned they actually lock into the notches on the alarm wheel, allowing the hour wheel to jump up that very small amount and for it to release the hammer. And this is how the alarm function works. The whole thing is held in place by this cover plate with 2 slightly downward bent tangs. Both of these tangs have a small amount of grease applied to them before this is put into place and screwed down, and this maintains downward pressure on the whole assembly so that the whole thing doesn't spring up and become misaligned. Here you can see the difference in the two stems. The one with the shorter squared section is for the alarm keyless works. Here we've got the movement complete, and I'm just going to demonstrate how you would set the hand and alarm positions. So you fully wind the alarm, which is the top crown, like so, and then pulling the hand setting stem out to the hand setting position. I'm just going to flip it over so you can actually see more easily what's going on. And what I'm going to do is turn this until these three slots inside these wheels align and it clicks into place, at which point this lever here which is sprung, will pop up as these slots align and the plates drop into one another, and that will allow the alarm to activate. So with the hands in the hand setting position, turning it anti-clockwise, we rotate this until that happens. At this point, obviously with the dial on, at this point you would put the alarm hand, which goes on first around this larger central section, to 12 o'clock. Then you would put the hour hand to 12 o'clock. Realistically, it doesn't matter which point you put them to, as long as you put both of them matching, because that's the point where they coincide, and that's how you know the alarm will set off when it reaches the appropriate hour hand marker. All that's left to do now is to refit the dial, and the simple nature of which hides the mess of levers and what have you underneath there, as you can see. And here I'm aligning the hour and alarm hands, so you wind that until it triggers, and then you know that they're both aligned, and then you can set the alarm hand and the hour hand to 12 o'clock. Turning that to test it just now to make sure that triggers at the appropriate time, and once again with the minute and second hand fitted. And then all that's left to do is to onto the time grapher for the initial regulation.